Well, good afternoon to you. 306 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, Adam Brandon joins us from Freedom Works. We'll get his reaction to the emergence of Speaker Mike Johnson. Learning so much about the new speaker. Came out of nowhere. We'll get into more details today. Tom Fitton is here at 4 o'clock from Judicial Watch as we dig into the Biden crime family, all of the latest headlines on that subject. E.J. Antoni from the Heritage Foundation at 4:30. New economic data, the left dressing it up yet again, putting lipstick on that pig. And Gordon Chang will be with us today at 5 o'clock as we talk China and its role in the Middle East. It's a big deal. Gordon will help unwind it for us. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Want to congratulate the Independent Women's Forum. They had a great gala last night right here in Washington. It was at it's now called the Waldorf Astoria. I didn't know that. Julie Gunlock, of course, you hear her on O'Connor and Company here mornings on WMAL. She sent me an invite, and I'm so stupid. I dithered before I got back to her. Corey, my producer, was like, hey, you've got to respond to Julie. Are you going to this gala or not? And so I finally did. I finally caught up with it. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going. And we go to this thing yesterday, and it was just a wonderful event. And again, I didn't realize that the Waldorf Astoria is actually the Trump Hotel. I'm like, where is this thing? And I finally pull up on it. I'm like, oh, it's the Trump. They renamed it, the old post office. It's now the Waldorf Astoria. But we go in last night, and we saw so many great friends, and it was just really nice to talk to everybody. Larry O'Connor presented an award last night. He did a great job, as always. And we saw, who did we see? We saw Riley Gaines last night. She got up. She presented an award to Inez Cantor Freedom. That was cool. That guy, the NBA player, Turkish. There's a bounty on his head, right? They're going to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to get him back into the country and imprison him. He's like, nope. But he got up there, and I was so impressed by him last night. He was talking about how it's been so many years since he's seen his mother or his sister, I believe. He hasn't seen his family in so many years. But he finished his speech last night by emphasizing that the good Americans who are in that room, and by extension, the ones who support the great work of the Independent Women's Forum, are his family. He feels so closely bonded to the people in this country who are fighting for liberty that he's just grateful to be with them. And it was very touching, and he was just a very impressive speaker. Not all NBA athletes are. Inez Cantor Freedom, the man who changed his name to literally be Freedom, was really great last night. We also ran into Miranda Devine from the New York Post. Just an wonderful woman. It is so nice to talk to her in person. We've talked to her, right? We've interviewed her so many times on the program, but she is just a phenom, and she was honored last night as kind of a woman of distinction. I forget the name of the actual award, but basically, hey, thanks for doing great things for the country. And Miranda Devine, right there at the top of the women who deserve an award like that, especially because she has done it in the face of the United States government trying to stop people from reading her coverage. She has been the victim of a tyrannical government right here in the United States. It was Miranda Devine, alongside of her colleagues over at the New York Post, that got a hold of Hunter Biden's laptop in the first place and began expressing that during the 2020 election. And then they were censored by a cabal of CIA officials and FBI officials and social media companies and the big corporate media companies, all working in concert to suffocate a story that would be damaging to Joe Biden's electoral ambitions. They were meddling in our election, attacking us. We've got more details on actually how all of that went down when we talk to Tom Fitton coming up at 4 o'clock today. But congratulations to everybody involved here. Also, Lynn Freeze, maybe a less familiar name to you, but she is the widow of the late Foster Freeze. They are an amazing couple they're worth a lot of money, and they've given a tremendous amount of money to conservative causes through the years. Good ones, really good ones. Not everybody spends their money effectively to help the country out. They have been for a long time. She also got an award last night, so God bless her for that. Very, very cool stuff. Let me get into what is going on right now as we head towards 2024. What does the picture look like at this moment? And by the way, as always, you can join me at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. I have a couple of headlines for you today. New York Post, Trump leads Biden among double haters in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. What are double haters? Donald Trump has a narrow advantage over President Biden among voters who dislike both major party frontrunners across 3 battleground states. That's according to a Democrat poll. So if you're the kind of respondent who's like, I don't like Trump and I don't like Biden, well, that person still prefers Trump over Biden if they double hate the men. The former president leads the current president 51 to 48% among so-called double haters in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Those are the states, folks. These are huge states to win. According to the survey conducted by Democrat firm GQR on behalf of pro-Biden super PAC, Unite the Country. I love that they're a pro-Biden super PAC and they call themselves Unite the Country. Everything's a lie. The pair are tied at 50% apiece among likely voters in the 3 states. Double haters accounted for roughly 16% of the total sample of 3,000 likely voters. All right, so you have a Democrat poll, a lefty poll, saying that the 2 men are tied in the swing states. What does that tell you? Meanwhile, The Hill's got a report today. Warning signs flash for Biden. Warning signs flash for Biden in recent polling. They say warning signs are flashing in recent polls for President Biden, with several showing him locked in a tight race with former President Trump, and some even showing him trailing his presumed rival, underscoring the extent to which the presidential election will likely come down to the wire. Biden's campaign, they've emphasized that the election is still more than a year away and that the president is putting in the work to mobilize voters to rally around his re-election bid. Still, the combination of the close polling with Biden's low approval ratings has some political observers cautious about Biden's chances for 2024. Dave Wasserman from the nonpartisan Cook Political Report posted earlier this month on X that he believed Biden would lose the election to an indicted Trump if the election was held today. He noted that Biden had a positive favorability rating while Trump's was about 41% in 2020, but Trump still was only 42,000 votes away in Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin from winning. Now, fast forward to 2024 with tied national polls, 40% Biden approval, equally dismal Biden-Trump favorability, more economic pessimism, growing migrant international crises, and the potential for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Cornel West to double Jill Stein's pull on campuses. Biden is in absolutely dire shape, says Dave Wasserman. So what does the left do? What does the left do? Unless natural causes intervene here and change everything up, Joe Biden is set to be the nominee for this party. And what do they do? Now, they're in a bit of a quandary. There's a pickle going on here with Joe Biden. The heir apparent is supposed to be Kamala Ding Dong, Kamala Harris. She is supposed to be next up, but Biden's unfavorability is sky high, and Kamala's is even worse. So that seems like a terrible idea, just as a pure, if you're figuring out who to substitute from the bench, who do you pull off the bench? You're like, hey, get in the game, kid. It's not Kamala Harris. She's picking the gum out of her hair. She doesn't know how to catch a fly ball. There's no chance that she's going to win this thing. So what do? What are their options? Well, if it was up to a certain California governor, you'd be waiting in the wings, wouldn't you? Governor Gavin Newsom has been doing some very interesting things lately. Here's Fox 11 in Los Angeles just yesterday. Take a listen to what he's up to.
China President Xi Jinping welcomes California Governor Gavin Newsom, the first U.S. governor to visit China since 2019.
What's your biggest takeaway from today's meeting with President Xi?
Well, I thought we accelerate our progress on climate in meaningful and substantive ways.
Newsom didn't know where, when, or even if this meeting would happen until moments before.
This is the Great Hall of the People, where the president of China welcomes the biggest dignitaries in the world.
I was the only California TV reporter with Newsom as he entered the historic building and then gathered with his aides for one of the biggest meetings of his life.
This is the holding room inside the Great Hall where Governor Newsom is preparing to meet the Chinese president.
Afterwards, Newsom sitting down with us and addressing critics who say instead of doing this, you should be home dealing with California's many issues.
What is California, Governor, getting out of this?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. There is not a single upside for California. Here's Greasy Gavin Newsom.
Getting out of this trip.
More tourism, I hope. More two-way trade, I hope. More economic development, more economic growth, more prosperity, more peace, more collaboration.
Newsom says after this meeting, more collaboration will be coming from Beijing to combat fentanyl abuse.
It was impactful for all of us, the willingness to engage on it, and not in a combative or accusatory way. But
Okay, so look, here's Newsom. So what's the knock against governors when they run for president of the United States? What do people say when they criticize? It doesn't matter who you are, generically, governors. Well, they don't have foreign policy experience, right? It's like, well, look, I understand you've been an executive in a state, but it's totally different. It's an entire country. You don't have foreign policy experience. How are other world leaders going to react to you, right? These are the things that are trotted out. So what is Gavin Newsom in the midst of doing? He's box checking. This is a box checking exercise. And there's still questions over whether or not President Octogenarian is going to meet with Xi Jinping this year. Is he going to meet with Xi? Is there going to be a summit? Is there going to be a meeting? Here's Gavin Newsom slicking his hair back, rubbing the grease in, and going to visit with Xi this week. And Xi Jinping happily taking that meeting because if he likes anything, it's chaos in the United States of America. Yep, I'll meet with Greasy Newsom. So they did. They did. The White House actually was asked about this today. Wait a second. Gavin Newsom, is he some sort of official emissary of the United States of America? Here's Coringe with a non-answer.
California Governor Gavin Newsom is currently in China and met with President Xi yesterday. Has the White House coordinated with him at all on this visit, and did the White House sanction this trip?
I just don't have anything to speak to on that trip. I would refer you to the State Department and also to the governor's office. I just don't have anything to share on that particular trip. Thank you. See you guys tomorrow.
All right, see you guys tomorrow. No more to talk about there. But Newsom is so obviously on the move to the point that he's, I think, literally measuring the drapes at the White House. Remember this report. This was July of last year. White House hunting, ? From the Washington Examiner. Newsom visits while Biden is away. California Governor Gavin Newsom looked right at home at the White House on Wednesday while President Joe Biden was out of town. Newsom was walking to a door to the White House when a reporter asked him how he was feeling. After a few exchanges, Newsom waved off the reporter and said, "See you in a bit," before heading inside. Biden, this was at the time, is currently away in the Middle East, visiting Israel, the West Bank, and Saudi Arabia, and is expected to return on Saturday. Why would the governor of California visit the White House while the president is away? What would be the point of that exchange, of that interaction? Who was he talking to there? So Gavin Newsom making moves. How else is he making moves? Again, he's so obviously running. So obviously running. He is set for a presidential debate soon against Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida. It's set to take place at the end of November. They're going to do this on the Fox News channel. Now, expectations for Newsom, as you might imagine for an event like this, are probably going to be rock bottom. He's going to come in with very low expectations because presumably he's going up against a stacked deck, right? He's got Sean Hannity sitting there, who doesn't agree with him on anything. And then you've got Ron DeSantis, the Republican political opponent. And I don't know if they agreed or not on what the status of an in-studio audience is going to be. But if they have one, the deck is stacked against Newsom. So in reality, all he has to do is smile to meet the very low expectations of what it must look like for him to go on Fox and do a debate. And so, in other words, at this point, like, you really kind of think he will overperform. He's going to overperform. He's going to have like a moment there that the left is going to want to exploit, and he's trying to create opportunities for them to look at him and go, maybe that guy, maybe instead of the old guy, the one who can barely do stairs, maybe Newsom. Maybe he can get us out of this. We just got to figure out how we deal with the race question, right? They got to figure out a way to, not alienate the left, which is so dependent on these racial questions. Like, oh, Kamala Harris, she deserves it. She's a black woman. How could you take that from her? That's going to be a real thing. And we'll see what the left does to suffocate that. But Newsom is on the move. And his record, of course, is the thing that needs to be elevated as we await Newsom's entry into all of this, should that actually happen. Because Newsom, at this moment, although you and I may know who Gavin Newsom is, how much of the country really knows Gavin Newsom right now. They're not that introduced to the guy. He's got greasy hair and a nice smile. A generic Democrat would be much better off in the presidential election than Joe Biden. And as far as anyone is aware, Gavin Newsom is a generic Democrat right now. It can't stay that way. People have to know what the hell's going on. The Wall Street Journal had an editorial about this just a couple days ago. DeSantis versus Newsom on violent crime. And they compared violent crime in Florida and California. You're not going to be surprised by the results at all, but they are eye-opening. And in a country that is paralyzed by a crime problem caused by Democrats, people deserve to know a lot more about this. We'll talk about this and a little bit more about what Newsom is up to, because he's even making legislative decisions right now based on the obvious presidential run he is doing at this very moment. So Ron DeSantis, Gavin Newsom set to have a debate with each other later in November. And let's do a comparison here. What do we got going on? In California, violent crime is now up. It's up since 2019 by 13%. In Florida, it is down by 31.5%. So nearly a third. Florida has dropped over these past 4 years. California has skyrocketed in crime, violent crime over these past 4 years. In fact, the rate of violent crime in Newsom's California is now nearly 500 per 100,000 people. That's twice as much as in Florida. Twice as much, which is 259 per 100,000. So it's been an explosion in violent crime. In Florida, property crime has fallen by 27% during the same time frame. California, they're up by 0.3%. And the Wall Street Journal says that is almost assuredly an undercount because California has all over the place. They decriminalize shoplifting and larceny for things that are worth less than $950. In other words, cops aren't even arresting people for these crimes. So it's hard to track the crime data if you say you're allowed to steal stuff under $1,000. California is increasingly a hellhole under Gavin Newsom. He has no business running the entire country, and yet he's making a play for it. We're going to keep an eye on that. He's doing taking a lot of moves to make that happen. We'll keep tracking it. And coming up, Adam Brandon is going to be with us. He's a man who tracks these politicians for a living. He's got a thought. He's with FreedomWorks, and he's got some thoughts on the new speaker, Mike Johnson. We'll break it all down. Coming up, minutes away. Hey there, 3:35 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Great to have you with us today. We've got Tom Fitton joining us from Judicial Watch at the top of the hour. More and more information about not only the Biden crime family, but in particular the cover-up of those crimes, all coming out just in the last 24 hours. We'll run through it with Tom. Dr. E.J. Antoni, the economist, is with us at 4:30 today. As we get into the latest economic data, the White House is saying things look great. When, of course, actually things are headed in the other direction yet again. And then Gordon Chang will be with us at 5 o'clock today. We talked to him about China and its role in the activities, the war, the violence, the terrorism in the Middle East. That's all ahead on the show, and you can talk to us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. We've got a new Speaker of the House. Can you believe it? Mike Johnson from Louisiana. Speaker Mike Johnson. We spent a big portion of the show yesterday having, as we talked about that breaking news, going through line by line all of the ways in which Mike Johnson actually seems like a pretty good guy for the job, despite being mostly unknown to the broader public. He's taken a lot of really important, strong, conservative positions through the years. He is now in his 7th year in Congress, and he's got a big job now going forward. For more on what to make of all of this, I want to bring in the president of FreedomWorks now, Adam Brandon, who joins us on the phone. Adam, great to have you back with us, sir.
Well, thanks very much for having me on, and I'm really happy we're not talking about another round of votes and going back to committees and trying to figure out who the next speaker is. We can finally start talking about legislating again.
You know, if I'm not mistaken, Adam, if I'm not mistaken, I feel like last time you and I spoke, you were predicting, rather, that it was going to be somebody that nobody was talking about, and sure enough, it's Mike Johnson, Adam. What do we make of this?
Well, one thing I got to say about Mike Johnson is that he's always kind of been close to leadership in the sense of like someone that people feel could be a leader. But the biggest problem he had is that Republicans and Democrats, they always want to have geographic diversity on the leadership team. And with Scalise coming from Louisiana, he kind of found himself, on the odd man out when the music stopped and the chairs were all taken.
Right.
Elise Stefanik kind of got his seat. So this is, in some ways, is a pretty beautiful poetic justice where someone who is very capable, but for some reasons outside of their own control, never were able to have the shot. Wow. Now you get to call him speaker.
Yes, that's right. And so if we look back at the career he's already had, and that includes his time as a constitutional lawyer for decades, fighting for religious liberty, amazing work there. He becomes a member of Congress, and during that time, he's fought for any number of conservative things. He's got high scores on all the conservative scorecards. He's very strong on the Second Amendment. He's very strong on the border. He wants to stop illegal immigration. He wants to get the budgets under control. He believes very strongly in the sanctity of life. It's hard to find something to dislike Mike Johnson on. Adam, how do you assess him in terms of the career he's already had?
Well, I think you nailed it right there. But one thing I will say in my personal interactions with the man and what I hear from everybody else, he's just a likable guy. Too often in politics, people have these either larger-than-life personas or these gruff personas. Johnson's always been kind of a quieter guy, but a friendly guy. He greets you he's the type of guy who greets you with a strong handshake and a smile. So I'm not surprised when you saw hardcore Freedom Caucus guys be like, yeah, this is an improvement over people that we've been voting on.
Yes.
And then also you have other people like moderate members from Northeast Pennsylvania that are like, we may disagree, but we've always had an honest and open conversation with him. He's always been respectful. And that's what you kind of need. That's kind of the temperament you need on a pretty, a very narrow majority that you have with Republicans right now. So he may just be exactly what the doctor ordered. One
of the questions you can't help but ask, at least among friends, when you talk about politicians in Washington is who owns them? Right, you look and you're saying, like, to what extent are they corrupted by special interests? Who are their big donors? Who's making, who's really pulling their strings? And what's interesting about Mike Johnson, and I'd love to get your reaction here, Adam, is that he's not a man of huge means. He's not a super wealthy dude. In fact, I've seen multiple reports in the last 24 hours that he's of very modest means. He may have a negative net worth, actually. He's got a little bit of debt to his name. His salary seems to be only from his $170,000 or so from being a member of Congress. That's a good salary. It's better than most Americans. And he also is receiving a little bit of coin, like $30,000 from Liberty University for some doing adjunct teaching over there. But beyond that, he's not one of these super wealthy guys. He's not Darrell Issa. He's not Bob Menendez with gold bars in the closet, as far as we're aware. So he's a modest means guy, and he hasn't been really a big part of leadership. He kind of had an assistant gig over at the RSC. But hasn't had this like big leadership position. So to me, these are kind of assets, Adam. A guy who's not already bought and paid for.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting to me to watch this is that it's been explained to me by several members in the caucus. Kevin McCarthy is still going to be there. Kevin McCarthy is still going to be your guy who's raising money ahead of this election, and that's always been McCarthy's strong suit. So McCarthy is not resigning. He's still there. He's going to be doing the part of the job that he probably did the best at. And then you look over, and Jim Jordan, it's not exactly like Jim Jordan's just going back to his committee. I mean, Jim Jordan has risen in stature and has probably the best toehold over the strongest part of the entire Republican caucus. So he's going to have a big say in the direction of everything.
Totally.
And then you've got someone like a Johnson who's got – because he's not the one who's going to, and I'm sure he's going to be doing his fundraising. Of course he has to. But I think his main job is to hold this caucus together and get things done. And he may look like a nice guy, and he may be a really affable guy, but I'm pretty comfortable seeing him sit down with Schumer and Biden and bash some things out.
Yeah.
I actually am pretty confident. Someone compared him to like a Boy Scout with a switchblade in his back pocket. someone who he's totally, his experience, he's not going to be outmatched going into the Oval Office when they start really getting down to some of these budget conversations.
No, he's made arguments on some of the biggest stages. I believe he argued before the Supreme Court, I believe, in his religious liberty cases and conducting this litigation. So he's not a man who is going to be just blindsided by having the big talks, which is good. And on Jim Jordan for a moment, Adam, I was telling friends last night, I almost feel like this is an even better outcome than if Jim Jordan would become Speaker of the House. And here's why. I like Jim Jordan a lot. He's a fierce conservative. He's great at advocating all sorts of things. I have been concerned about the extent to which that Jim Jordan is compromised by big tech. We don't have that issue now. He's not going to be Speaker of the House. He's still going to be forceful. He's going to be right there at the top of the Judiciary Committee fighting for all of these things in public. That's a great position for him to be in. It's hard for me to imagine how this could have turned out better, actually.
Well, in retrospect, when you look back on it, it did turn out pretty well. Now, I do know, again, going to some of the members I've been talking to, they were really exhausted being stuck in the same room with a bunch of other people. A lot of nerves got frayed. So they were kind of like they had to come up with someone who they liked and they all could agree upon. Now, going forward, the hard part is keeping this coalition together. You're going to have a CR, and that's going to give you space to get these appropriations bills done,
right,
to set up these conversations with Schumer and with Biden. So, and as much as I hate CRs, I think there's just no way you're going to get it done in a week.
Well, the idea is to buy some time.
Have to do something.
And in Mike Johnson's case, Mike is not the guy who agreed to the deal that McCarthy did. Mike's going to have to establish his own agreement with all these conservatives going forward. But you can't hold him to Kevin McCarthy's promises, especially with such a short window. He does need a little space to be able to get these bills passed. But beyond that, going into next year, no excuses. You've got to do it on time.
Well, I mean, that's what – look, these bills aren't – a lot of them are close to the finish line. It's not like he's going to start over from scratch. Right. A lot of the stuff is 80, 90% there. But at the root of all of this, those spending bills, they were supposed to be done by June.
Yeah.
So that you have time to get these things through committee and all of that. And I think the big thing is just to avoid another one of these giant, dirt sandwiches of an omnibus bill. That's what everyone's really trying to get away from. And so we haven't really done that since I think I was a freshman in college, 1995, 1996,
right,
something like that. So, okay, it's been difficult, but if we could actually get to have a speaker right now that we get these bills done in June and set a new precedent of how the House should operate, that's going to be good for a lot of things. And then I also have to put a plug in for something that Johnson has agreed to do and that other members are. And some people may say this is punting, but I think it's actually really important, is this fiscal debt commission. We've got a massive problem with our entitlement programs. You're really not going to get your handle on the debt and deficit until you deal with those in the long run. And so I was very pleased when I saw that Johnson enthusiastically supported putting a commission together next year to tackle, while you're doing all these appropriations, while you're doing the rest of it, you can walk and chew gum and also have part of the body working on thinking about the long run, how we're going to do these entitlements over the next 10, 20 years.
Do you think
and not bankrupt?
I always get nervous, though, with these Washington commissions and blue ribbon committees. Do you think they're actually going to do something worthwhile?
That's my hope.
Yeah.
I hope to lean in on it because I hope this is important. Look, we're at $33.6 trillion today. In 10 years, we're going to be at 50.
Yep.
And 95% of that debt's driven by Social Security and Medicare. And look, if my mom and dad are listening in Cleveland, Ohio, they would know that they need, those programs are important to them. They've been promised to them. They're in their 1980s. So, and younger generations, I just finished up a poll with millennials, and almost no millennials think there's going to be any Social Security or Medicare left over for them. So this is a massive intergenerational, serious, this is bigger than party. You get this wrong, you could bankrupt the country. So, I have high hopes at this point. But it's going to depend on, let me see who's actually on the committees. But I have hopes that this is at least the start of a serious conversation.
Yeah. Social Security, it's interesting. I do wonder what you think on this. I imagine you probably don't want to lift the caps, but Social Security, the limit of your income is $168,000, I think, right now. And then beyond that, you don't get taxed on Social Security anymore. It's like, oh, you've reached your limit for the year. You don't have to get taxed anymore. And I always thought that was interesting because it's not it's regressive. It's like you'd think, well, if we're going to make it solvent, then, maybe just get rid of the caps and everybody always has to kind of have the same skin in the game.
Well, there's some of that. There's also means testing, but I think in the long run, the real opportunity here, especially for younger folks, is to give them some options to opt into to move some of that money into more 401k type setups. That's how real intergenerational wealth gets built up.
Yeah.
So actually, Social Security is going to be an easier thing to deal with in the long run. It's Medicare, it's Medicaid, it's the fact that the U.S. budget for healthcare is infinity. One of my great disappointments in my career, I worked really hard to stop Obamacare, and there were several opportunities. And what's happened? Well, Obamacare has continued to kind of collapse into single payer, and that's coming up. And the budget in the United States for healthcare is infinity. That doesn't work.
No.
So we're going to have to think about some ways that you put market incentives to hold the cost. But I think I want to do things that you increase that patient-doctor relationship. I want to do things that you put markets on top of this so that you have competition. I got LASIK eye surgery a few years ago, and it was amazing, the competition for that surgery. So there's a lot of little things that you got to do to solve these problems. And again, I'm optimistic. I just think in our political climate, sometimes maybe you do need a commission that could take a deeper look. But again, you're going to have to put serious people on this commission. I mean, if I look up and I see AOC on the commission, I'm going to lose a little bit of my hope and enthusiasm.
I don't know. Wasn't she like an economics major or something? She should be great at this, right?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, I studied economics and she studied economics. I don't know if we read the same book.
No, I doubt it. I very much doubt it. I'm not even sure she read the book. Adam, thank you very much for your time today. The president of FreedomWorks. Really appreciate your assessment of new Speaker Mike Johnson, everything else going on in this crazy town. Thank you, sir.
Well, thanks very much. Things are looking up.
Appreciate
the time.
Well, that's nice to hear. All right. Congressman Jamal Bowman, Democrat of New York, pled guilty today to yanking a false fire alarm in a United States House office building last month. Axios' report. Bowman's office said Wednesday they had reached an agreement with the D.C. Attorney General for the charges to be dropped in 3 months in exchange for a formal apology and a $1,000 fine. Oh, it's a very sweetheart deal. Democrats and their sweetheart deals. The charges will be dismissed as long as Bowman abides by the conditions of his 3-month probation agreement. Presumably it's not to pull fire alarms again. I am responsible for activating a fire alarm, Bowman said in a statement. I will be paying the fine issued and look forward to these charges being ultimately dropped. Capitol Police say that we finished our investigations. Our agents gathered all the evidence, packaged it up, and sent the entire case with charges to prosecutors for their consideration. Bowman, remember what he claimed? I was rushing to a vote. I had to go. And I didn't know how to get the door open. And I thought if I pulled the fire alarm, that the door would open, that it would release me so I could sprint to do the people's business. This is what Jamal Bowman said.
Do you still stand by your statement that pulling the fire alarm was an accident?
I don't know why this has gotten so much attention. I was literally just in a rush to go vote, man. That's all it was.
Mm-hmm. Are you afraid of any repercussions, either from leadership or from legally from Capitol Police?
I mean, listen, I take responsibility for what I did, but like I said, I was in a rush to go vote, and, the investigation will sort everything else out.
Have you talked to Jeffries about it?
Oh, yeah, of course. That's day one, yes.
How was that conversation?
Well, I got to keep that between me and the leader, so I'm not going to share that publicly. Yeah, but we've been in touch with each other.
Yeah, I was just in a rush. I was just trying to go vote. Why is everybody hassling me? Stop harshing my mellow. Okay, here's the thing. He was lying, and it was super obvious at the time, and it is abundantly obvious now. There is video footage that has just been released. Have you seen the still photo at this point of Black Mr. Clean pulling the fire alarm down? Have you seen this? Yeah, Jamal Bowman. We already saw the still photo of it. Yep, that's him. It's very obvious it's him. The footage from that camera has just been released. And what do you think it shows? Does it show Jamal Bowman pushing his way out the door, attempting to get out of it after pulling the fire alarm? No, it's actually the exact opposite. Jamal Bowman walks up to the doors where there are signs indicating how it is that you might exit them, which is you have to hold them in place for a certain amount of time, and then the doors will open. The signs are super explicit. He takes both signs, rips them off the door, takes them away from the door, turns around, pulls the fire alarm, and never turns back to the door. He never attempts to even open the doors. at all. He just yanks the fire alarm and sprints off. He pulled the fire alarm. He's gone. He was trying to delay the votes in the United States House. It was what we might call an insurrection. He was getting in the way of congressional proceedings through an underhanded tactic of trying to yank a fire alarm. I'm not even quite sure why he stole the signs off the window. Maybe to bolster his latest excuse. Oh, I didn't realize that there were instructions to open the door. I just thought if you pulled the fire alarm, I could open it. It's funny because he never tried to open them. You'd think he would have thought this through a little bit more, right? Like plotted out the cameras, little Ocean's 11 approach to how to get through this entire saga. Typical Democrat. Didn't think ahead. Jamal Bowman. He's good for laughs, though. Tom Fitton is going to join us minutes from now. We'll take a look at another Democrat criminal, the Biden family, and what we're learning about them lately.